I have every confidence that President Trump will do what he promised to the people. Help is on the way. Keep protesting. If this regime falls, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, they all go. It'd be the biggest change since the fall of the Berlin Wall. The Ayatollah will never be our friend. He's a religious Nazi. President Trump, you said help is on the way. That has to be real. It has to be real soon. Do it, Mr. President. The people of Iran are begging you to be on their side.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham urging President Trump to keep pressing Iran as the U.S. military builds its presence in the Gulf. Dana Marie McNichol has the very latest from West Palm Beach, Florida. That's where the president is spending time today. Hey, Dana Marie.
Hey, Rich. Well, last night on Air Force One, as he was coming down here, President Trump was asked if he decided on a strike against Iran. He said, hey, I can't tell you that information, but a deal with Iran is being discussed. Take a listen.
You could make a negotiated deal that would be satisfactory with no nuclear weapons. That said they should do that, but I don't know that they will. But they are talking to us, seriously talking to us.
As the president is weighing his military options, widespread protests and violence continue in Iran. Trump has made it clear that military planning is happening, confirming last night that ships are heading in that direction. He told Fox News' Jackie Heinrich that the fleet is even bigger than what is currently being stationed in Venezuela. The U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker, he spoke with us on our military presence in the Middle East.
They understand the United States is uniquely positioned to do these types of engagements, but at the same time, the Iranians could de-escalate very easily and simply, and we'll see the ball's in their court. But, you know, President Trump is not going to be forever patient on this.
Details about military action are being closely guarded. President Trump says the United States will not share military plans with Gulf allies while negotiations with Iran continue. And Rich, the White House has not shared exactly how long these negotiations could take place or what will trigger that final decision. As you mentioned, the president is spending time here in Palm Beach, but he does plan to head back to Washington, D.C., where it's not much warmer than here later this afternoon.
The whole coast. I mean, it's just Dana Marie McNichol. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's bring in National Security Institute Senior Fellow Andrew Barine. Andrew, thank you for joining us. You heard it there. The president is saying that the Iranians are talking to us, seriously talking to us. But in the U.S. and the Iranians have been seriously talking to each other on and off for more than a decade right now. Is there reason to believe that the Iranian regime has actually changed what it's willing to give up here?
Well, I think that part of the calculus is how much leverage in terms of kinetic force, both on the offensive side with things like F-15s, F-35s, hundreds and hundreds of Tomahawk missile tubes in their backyard, in addition to their off-ramps. And it comes down a lot to what are the red lines for the Iranian regime. President Trump and the White House are making very clear that no nuclear capability needs to be first and foremost. And secondly, they must stop killing protesters that some estimates have reported over 30,000 Iranians may have been killed by the Ayatollah's regime in the recent protests.
What's the assessment of how powerful the Iranian government or the Iranian military is right now after all the strikes and the war with Israel over the summer, really attacking the different groups that Iran backs in the region, its missile defense system, all of that? What kind of a position is the Iranian government in right now?
Well, in my own assessment, I'd assess Iran is probably at their weakest point. They are at the ebb of the mullah's power over the Iranian population, probably since any time since 1979. So the Hezbollah proxies have been beaten down by the Israelis. Hamas is on the ropes and has been beaten down. All of these proxy groups, even Palestinian Islamic Jihad, folks that are run through Al-Quds Force, which is an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps paramilitary training component, if you will. So a lot of their global, regional, international terrorism efforts have been greatly compromised. Add to that things like Midnight Hammer, which showed that the United States had the ability to completely, almost flawlessly, defeat their integrated air defense systems. And now you add to this the political unrest. And one of the things that I'm watching most closely through big data analytics and a lot of these Starlink terminals that have been smuggled into Iran and are leaking data out to compromise their blackout, it indicates that there might be some pressure and divide growing between the ideological extremists of the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps and its Artesh or regular military. And I think if we start seeing the regular military either abandon positions or refuse to participate with IRGC in internal control operations, I think those are the types of indicators that would show Iran might actually be ready for some strikes that could result in regime change. And I think a lot of U.S. and allied folks would benefit if there was regime change in Iran.
I mean, do you think the regime's days are actually numbered here? This is just coming off a month where we saw protests throughout the street, human rights organizations saying that the Iranian government has killed several thousand people in just the past month there. Is that the recipe, perhaps? Or are we looking at a situation where there's not much time left for this regime? Or, I mean, it has stayed in power for nearly 50 years.
I mean, that is the let's call it $1 trillion question. 20% of the oil flowing, world's oil flows through the Straits of Hormuz. Iran has been the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism in my 20-plus year career in national security. There's really no question that they have withstood several revolutions. Recall the Green Revolution several years ago. And I think that if regime change were to happen, I think that right now, if you put together that calculus we talked about, the compromise of their terrorist proxies, the demonstration that their integrated air defense systems are not as effective as they thought, they launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, with some effect. I think about 30 Israelis were killed in the 12-day war in one of those large attacks. So I think that Iran, the regime, is potentially in a place to say for survival, they might want to abandon their nuclear program. They might also want to kind of follow on with more compliance with President Trump's demands that they stop killing protesters, stop doing the executions of what they deem enemies of the state internally. And so there are a lot of factors, but I think what we're looking at is much like Venezuela when we had the standoff of a slightly smaller U.S. naval armada. Maduro saw what happened, and rest assured the Iranians, Chinese, and Russians and North Koreans also saw what happened. And so we're seeing, I think, Iran's going to have to make I don't know how long they have. Nobody does. But they do need to determine if they want to strike a deal over nuclear programs, stop killing tens of thousands of their own people, or if, really nobody knows what happens next. But that is the question we're all watching.
Well, plenty going on there. Andrew Breen, thanks so much for joining us today. Much appreciated.
Great to be with you, Rich.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.